Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us in this workshop. We are really short of space here, so this is really full of people. This is part of the chakras system at Aapresid through an agreement with INTA, and the purpose is to respond to the farmers' demands. For that, we deal with the different issues with a systemic approach, and we work under two principles. That is, learning by doing, because everything is done in real production situations, and horizontal leadership. That's the way we all work with the same objective. Particularly, this panel is about the biological aspect, to evaluate biological technologies in the field and communicate knowledge about this. I want to thank the technicians, farmers, those that always work with us and support us so much in the network, and also the companies that support us, and of course, science, today represented by Martín and Fabricio, and all the others that give scientific quality to the network. I'm not going to introduce them because, it would take a long time if I read all their bios, but Martín Torres Duggan, apart from being an agricultural engineer with a magister in soils from the University of Buenos Aires, he's the academic coordinator of the network, and Fabricio Cassán is a microbiologist with a PhD in biological sciences from the National University of Rio Cuarto, professor of plant physiology and researcher at the CONICET, and a member of the group of experts of the network. So, Martín, the floor is yours. How are you? Good afternoon. It will be very tough to speak after lunch. I'll try to stick to the times because Fabricio and myself like talking a lot and we don't have a lot of time. So I suppose that I should move the slides forward manually. As Ignacio was saying, our purpose at the network is to communicate information to the farmers, reliable information about the use of bio inputs, particularly biostimulants. Today, we are trying to share with you some concepts mainly that will help you improve your decision making. That is the big objective. So we're going to the concepts, and from there, perhaps we will move on to the practical side at the end, and you can ask questions. Here you have sort of the large areas I'm going to cover today. It has to do with how we define organic products, biological products. That will be the first part. Then I'm going to be talking about whether these biological products are used or not, and what are those markets, and then some comments about that. And the thing that I think is the most attractive part is the last one, where I'm going to invite you to think how to come out of these crossroads of using biological products in contexts as in the Pampas region in Argentina. There we're going to try and think together. In the first part, I'm going to, bear in mind that the biological products and biostimulants in particular have emerged in the past few years based on the scientific advancements mainly, and it's a combination of scientific innovation on the one hand and the demands on the other hand, the demands from farming, the farmers that want to add environmentally friendly products in their production systems. And that is where innovations come about, particularly with biologicals. They come from this convergence. There are many pieces of news on both sides, and we're going to talk about it. Not all the products we see are new. These materials have many ingredients that are well known already, but what changes sometimes is the demand we are seeing, or some innovations with some additives or new things. That is, what changes is the demand on the one hand, which is present, and sometimes as a result, the innovation that was in the scientific aspect had a heavier weight. When we think of biostimulants, there are many, and there are many ways of doing it. I'm going to follow Dujardin's line of thought, a professor from Belgium, and some regulatory aspects. Here you see, for instance, the definition from the point of view of the European Union, how it is defined. And there you see that biostimulants are products that they mentioned fertilizing product, and that is a problem because I can tell you they are not fertilizers, but they are materials that we do know have substances or ingredients that we know will have an impact on these aspects that are listed there: nutrient use efficiency, tolerance to abiotic stress, quality attributes. Those are the specific concrete things from the regulatory aspect are defined as having an impact, as the impacts of biostimulants. In the US regulation, the same things are highlighted. It's a little more vague because it speaks about substances or microbes that have an impact or benefit natural processes in plants. And they also mention things that have to do with improving the quality of the soil. That is, things that are more related to the amendments, but there are many concepts and definitions in the regulatory frameworks. These are just two examples. And some common things. Almost all these regulatory frameworks speak about the nutrient use efficiency, abiotic stress, and those are the things that perhaps are the common denominator. In the case of the Farm Bill, they also speak about yield, which is not always mentioned, and perhaps it's not present in other frameworks. But here it describes plant protection. From the regulatory aspect, in biostimulants, they don't speak of sanitation, at least not in the definition. I will be showing things that have been published in scientific papers. I follow the line of Dujardin, as I mentioned, and then you can also then check many of the things I'm going to mention here. What I would like to show you is the positioning proposed by Dujardin. There you can see that biostimulants, I think, let's move backwards. The biostimulants there have an impact or cover the spectrum that goes from nutrition aspects and protection aspects. We see that fertilizers provide nutrients, the biostimulants at the end of the day will be providing indirectly to the plants the resources for the plant to improve their nutrition and their protection. I mean, there can be effects, and there are effects of microorganisms that will also improve the capacity of the plants to defend themselves. And from the scientific point of view, we see that biostimulants do have a wide spectrum, that perhaps it's more rigid in the regulatory framework, and these aspects that have to do with plant protection are removed, and they are more classified as pesticides or biopesticides or biocontrollers. But what I like about this scheme is the analogy between nutritional products, the analogy with human nutrition, and the supplements, where, well, the supplements or biostimulants will be providing or improving nutrition. That's why it has a direct connection with nutrition. And they will also add to the plant protection. That's why, from the scientific perspective, we see that we can think of a wider paradigm that goes beyond the nutritional aspect. But the regulatory focus is normally what I mentioned before. I also like this idea of thinking of this proposal of Dujardin, the concept of plant health, with a wider concept, not so much control, but health. Health would be the plant's ability to face the phenological phases and maximize that genic expression of the plants and act against the variability of the environment and sustaining those physiological processes, the physiological balance, and that can have a benefit both in yield or in the resilience of the crops. A great challenge we are seeing is that biostimulants have many active ingredients. Even if you know how each of them works, when you put different ingredients in the field, and the formulation of the different ingredients is very challenging because the addition of the ingredients does not explain the outcome. There are interactive aspects. That's why we should also have the information about the efficacy in the field. We should know the consistency between what happens in the field, the biological logic, and know the ingredients, but considering that it's quite complex how it works. I'm sure Fabricio will give you more details. Some concepts that come out from these wonderful works by Dujardin, I would like to highlight these concepts. One is the definition of biostimulants, and this is what I want you to take home with you, is that they are evaluated based on what they do and not on what they have. They are evaluated based on their results, and we should be very clear about that. The effects may the impact on yield, but it's not the only one. There are many examples in different crops of improvement in quality, crop quality attributes, resistance to climate variability, the quality of the harvested products, which, I mean, the target may not be the yield, and there's not necessarily a direct effect of the biostimulant. Actually, the effects of biostimulants are indirect. They affect nutrition or the plant response in terms of immunity. It's not direct. I'm not putting nutrients. So we should have a wider approach. We should have a validation. That validation has to be consistent between what we see in the field, the biological logic. We should know what's happening. In Europe, you can register products without knowing their mechanisms of action based on field efficiency, on the efficacy, on the outcomes, and that generates blind spots of knowledge. Some products are registered, they work, but we don't know what they do, and ideally we should know what they do. Having a logic of the effect in the field, the mode of action, or the mechanisms of action, and have that spectrum would be ideal, and very often we are not aware of it. And also bear in mind that biostimulants should be integrated in the production systems. These are resources, tools, but they will not replace an input. It's not a magical solution to replace nutrients, essentially. That does not appear anywhere. It doesn't say that I can substitute. All the paradigm of the positioning is based on supplementing plant nutrition, supplementing the addition of fertilizers, as Dujardin says in the paper that he published on July 31st, a brilliant paper. Just by reading it, all this comes very clear. And accepting that we are speaking about complex materials whose effects depend on their condition, they are not reproducible, and that is essential when we see these products, because it's not the same as selling fertilizer. There can also be a preventive strategy. Very probably, I can add these products to improve the capacity of the product to overcome stresses. Whether there's a stress or not, or perhaps we don't see the effect on the yield, but you give them the possibility for that crop to respond better to climate variability or abiotic stresses. Communicate in a credible manner. We should communicate what the product does in a credible manner, their benefits, their modes of action, their challenges. Be honest in telling farmers, well, this can work in these conditions, not in all. And that is a challenge for those that sell and develop these products. We should be responsible with innovations. There's a professional ethics when we offer these products or others. And I highlight this in the trap that may come out of the substitution. I can substitute fertilizers in high doses with this technology. These technologies supplement nutrition. They don't replace it. And this is in all papers. And finally, we should target the agronomy of care, says Dujardin, an approach to resilience, at smart adjustment or adaptation, and not so much the chemical or biological control, a preventive approach to the system, to the processes. That is the idea. I'm not going into the details of the markets because Fabricio is eager to start, but basically statistics of the fertilizer or the biostimulant market show a huge increase globally, both in microbial, non-microbials, with very high growth rates, much higher than what we're seeing in fertilizers. This shows on the demand side that if we are smart, we can position products that add value for the farmer. The farmer is asking for this, but for this curve to grow and be consistent, we need to be consistent in the value proposals that we are showing. They have to be based on science, on scientific research. The Argentine market is also growing. Actually, last year it also grew. 2023 and 2024, not so much, but last year there was a 10% growth in the biologicals market. It's a small market still, but it's growing at consistent rates, consistent with what we see in other parts of the world. And we are going to increasingly see biological ingredients in value-added fertilizers. So we will get used to seeing products that add value to production systems because they're growing a lot. There we see the values, the growth rates of these products that are also complex, but also add value in terms of yield, and they add functionality to the products. They add possibilities for the crops to overcome stresses, to improve quality, etc. And that is very interesting as another tool to be added. And finally, I'm going to show you some charts and details to break the ice because I would like to have a conversation about this. And it has to do with how we position these products in contexts like Argentina's, where we have massive direct crops, but we have a low use of the soil analysis tools. So in that context, we want to use the biologicals. First, we need to answer other questions. How we make the soil that is going to receive this material be working properly, how to improve the fertility. We have yield gaps that are very big, 30-40%. This is indicating nutritional limitations, physical quality limitations that are conditioning the yield of the crops. Nutritional gaps that have been published recently, or they are about to be published, but they are very well known. Those nutritional gaps is a smart way of saying that we are not using enough nutrients for the levels of productivity we are having. Soil fertility maps that are increasingly poor. Although the use of fertilizer grows, we are not seeing that growth as a spillover on the soil fertility, and it's a big question. And a light of hope is from one of the local papers. We see a lot of papers that show that if you fertilize in a balanced way a long time, you improve the yield, you improve profitability and the quality of the soil. It's an easy answer to say I cannot fertilize because a fertilizer is expensive or because I'm renting the field. That's the easy way. The difficult answer is to see more for consultants to read more international local literature and to see they can fertilize better, improve the quality of the soil and be more sustainable. I'm sharing a QR code. I hope you help us use it. I don't know what you're supposed to do with this QR code, but it has to do with a survey we are doing with the Austral University, the Agribusiness Center, to study the adoption of bio inputs. Pablo McLean is here, so if you have any question, you can ask him. Should I leave it there for you to take a picture? That's the QR code. We are needing farmers to produce this survey to understand how farmers react when they have to decide whether to buy an input, how they make the decision, to understand that better. Thank you so much, Fabricio. Apologies. The floor is yours.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Hi, I am going to walk around the stage, and I know that I don't have much time, so I'll hurry. First, I would like to thank Aapresid for this invitation. It is a pleasure to be here and share with you part of my team and my work and my knowledge. I would like to say happy Agricultural Engineers Day because it was yesterday, and even though I'm a microbiologist, I feel like I am one of you too. While we decide the topics and how to deal with this presentation, and we decided to focus on biostimulants, and especially those with microbial origin, there was a change in the standards and regulations. And if I do not make an introduction of what this is in Argentina, you won't understand that word. So the basic thing is for us to understand the regulations. And this is called bio-input, and this is a definition that exists since 2013. This definition here, which is quite similar to the definition of a biostimulant, but for the Argentine state, this is called bio-input. This replaced a SENASA resolution from 2011 in which biological products were considered biofertilizers or fertilizers of a biological origin. So what happened was that the reason why this definition was no longer used was because microbial origin products usually do not have a contribution in terms of nutrients, but they do contribute in terms of mechanism for the plant. So this definition was changed, amended, and in 2023, there was a new classification of biologicals considered bio-input in Argentina, where they were considered inoculants and non-microbial biological fertilizers. So here there's a difference between microorganisms and its function within the first group. But this definition also considered biological stimulants, and among them, those of a microbial and non-microbial origin. And here we have algae extracts and the biostimulants that we hear about today. And in Argentina, with this definition, we've been dealing with biostimulation for a long time, but in a context usually dealing with microbial origin products and also other products with microorganisms. So this is the resolution that went into force on July 25th. And this is actually when I was preparing this presentation. So here, bio-input are considered products for vegetal nutrition, but also for pest control. And that is unique in the world. We have only one classification for both groups. And here, this includes biological control agents, defense stimulants, and biochemical substances. But within the classification of those inputs in order to improve vegetal nutrition, we have organic fertilizers and compost and others, products based on microorganisms. It's not very clear, and of course it involves microorganisms and non-microbial stimulants. So basically, I wanted to communicate this concept, and these changes affected my idea, my original idea. But still, you will see how, regardless of this definition, stimulation from microorganisms is a clear concept in terms of nutritional contribution, contribution for the plant to be able to overcome an unfavorable situation, and also the effect of these biostimulants on the floor. I won't repeat this that was mentioned before, but comparing the EU definition, the American definition, the Argentinian definition, we see that there are clear words: soil, plants, stress, and other attributes. We are all speaking the same language mostly. And in Argentina, we do have success cases that were very clear with regards to these products of microbial origin, which are called biostimulants or bio-input. And you already know this, I don't have to discuss this with you, but I do want to show you this data from the market. And someone yesterday said, we trust so much a microorganism because we are trusting it with 130 million dosages per year, 60 million hectares of biological treatment. And in the case of soy crops, this represents the treatment with biostimulants of microbial origin, bio-input, also from this origin in South America. So clearly, This is a technology that in our country and in the region was established more than 50 years ago. Farmers trust and use this technology, and we are talking about microbial origin bioinput or biostimulants, and this is a consolidated technology. Therefore, this is an example for us to follow regarding new technologies that have similar attributes. But soybean was the first of many. Behind that, the market got diversified, and companies were not only selling products for soy, but also for other crops, not only for soybean. Therefore, with this commercial diversification, there were no biological concepts being generated, and we were considering nitrogen, phosphorus, induction of resistance, mechanisms linked to the abiotic stress in plants. Therefore, there was and there is a huge offer of bioproducts based on many microorganisms linked to several processes that benefit the growth of plants or improve the behavior of crops. And within this group of microbial origin, we can be talking about Asoprilillum, Azotrobacter, Bacillus, Penicillium, but there's a specific group that we should talk about, which is the second one more used here, and this is the Zospiridium, the Azospirillum, which is the second one most used in South America after Rhizobius in soybean. And here in the Brazilian market, this is used in two corn campaign and inoculated for soybean crops. But clearly this is a technology that is present for a long time, has been present for a long time. And unlike the novelty, that of course is something that attracts us, with its new formats, I believe that this sort of technology can be an answer for the why. So what do we know about the Azospirillum? It is 100 years old, and there's a father, Martinus Benchering, from the Netherlands. There's a mother, who is Joana Gondareiner from Brazil, who fostered the study of bacteria fixating nitrogen all over the continent. And this is boring, right? But what we have in red here, Azospirillum brasilense, was the only commercially used species in the entire continent. However, from the taxonomy point of view, some groups in Brazil and Argentina started studying this species, which has had others inside. And one of these is Azospirillum argentinense, which is AZ39, which is the strain used in our country or recommended in our country for the inoculation of corn and also the co-inoculation with Rhizolium in soybean. So this is what we are using here. And this is not a taxonomical issue. We're like, oh, you changed the name. No, but it's not just that. There are different attributes. If we compare this strain with others from other species, such as the brasilense, we can understand that the mobility within the plant is different. If we put this bacteria on leaves, it goes into the roots, and if we put it on the roots, it will go into the leaves. And this will not happen with other strains like Azospirillum brasiliense. And this has an effect on the plant. And we are going to be connecting this to what is it that these bacteria do for plants that make it so successful, both in use and in behavior. This is a way to summarize these 100 years of work, a lot of experimental work, a lot of information on how things are done to propose mechanisms, nitrogen fixation, phytostimulation, production of hormones, and a very important agricultural impact. This is part of the work that was done of metadata. We gathered a lot of information, and we were able to define these values in order to differentiate this and how we have a difference between winter and summer crops. And in the co-inoculation with rhizobium in soybean, we see a difference. And we understand why. And if we now know how this works, then we can understand the technology and it will become more friendly for producers. So how is this used? In the past few years, you can see that we've had almost 22 million hectares treated with this bacteria, 25 million doses, most of it in Brazil, and in co-inoculation with soybean and in corn, a very relevant contribution. But also, there is an important perspective of the state, because this is a state policy. The Brazilian state said we need to save money on nitrogen. And the Brazilian state realized that by using this bacteria, we would be saving nitrogen and we would be investing or issuing less nitrogen in the environment, less than 0.01. And this would equal to minus 14 million tons of CO2, and this will give us a gain of $1.8 to $5.1 trillion a year. The state is suggesting this for or two companies, and Embrapa is saying to companies that this is reliable and companies can use it. So why is this happening? Because this is what is happening in the world. There's a problem related to the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere. That dot right there is the Industrial Revolution. So this is clearly man-made. Let's not blame this on the Earth, geological eras. This is our fault. So how can we solve this? Well, understanding where the problem is. And CO2 is not the only problem. We have other gases affecting these other greenhouse gases, and NO2 is one of the most dangerous. Why? Because it has 264 times more heat created than CO2. I'm sorry. For each N2O molecule that is released is equivalent to 264 of CO2. So what is the problem with this NO2? Well, part of it ends up in agriculture. 60% of what agriculture is producing as CO2, which is not necessarily greenhouse gases. Like, for example, we have the fixation of nitrogen on the soil, but the problem with the nitrous oxide is that we cannot solve it. We have 60% of nitrous oxide contributing with 14% of greenhouse gases emissions from agriculture. But most programs were around CO2, right, in this Congress. And nitrous oxide is something that we're not paying attention to. So what's the problem with nitrous oxide? We will see that it has a generation component from the nitrogenated chemical composition. So here we have a paradigm because we need to produce more, but how can we have this production with less environmental impact? And this is a clear message. Let's intensify agriculture. And people say this to agricultural engineers as if this was so simple. Well, how can we do this? Well, there are different axes, and one of them is related to nutrition. How can we manage nutrition? Those of you who are agricultural engineers, and once again, happy day, you studied this in university, and you know that this Mr. Ligier law says that yield is directly proportional to the use of fertilizers. So the discussion is no longer around fertilizers, but I mean, it would be absurd to discuss a non-fertilization practice. And we know that through fertilization, we should work in a smart way so that we are not going into toxicity, but in a rational way. So how can we use technology in a rational way? And understanding how it works. So through these tools, we know that the first definitions that Martín gave were related to improving the use of nutrients, right? So it's not contributing, but optimizing the use of nutrients. And technology can help with this. And this is the problem through which the nitrogenated chemical fertilization has an impact on global warming, because any sort of formula including nitrogen will end up creating nitrous oxide for several reasons. Therefore, the thing is that the previous perspective was like nitrate will go into the soil and contaminate, yeah, but it will also go into the atmosphere in the shape of nitrous oxide. So, how do we see this affecting the present, this change in the perspective? Well, we have a technology based on bioinputs, such as azospirillum, and we have the work of Mariangela Hungría, who will receive the Alternative Nobel Prize this year, related to the diet of people in the world, and works such as her that are pioneer because they start to show other facets of the use of bacteria that used to be nitrogen fixating bacteria. So what Mariangela is doing here is proving that you can reduce fertilization up to 25% by incorporating a microorganism, and through that you will obtain a financial benefit, like you see on the last line, and an environmental benefit as well. There are other works. This one here is almost like born because it says that you can reduce up to 50% of fertilization. These are very specific conditions. It's an extreme example. But still, we are starting to see work that says, let's fertilize through biologicals and let's see how much we can improve the efficiency of fertilization. And in this process, there are other works that are being published that are not only talking about nitrogen. We have phosphorus, potassium. The plant is drinking more water with these inoculations. So it's not just nitrogen fixation. There's something else. The plant is obtaining macronutrients and water in a more efficient way when it is colonized by these bacteria. And there are other works showing this too. And the plant is getting the micronutrients in a more efficient way, with all the problems that we have in Argentinian soils with these macronutrients. So how do we explain this? And here we need to be very specific and say, okay, so how much technology do we need to know about? Because most of the biostimulants are these tests in the field, show that I can do this, I can do that, I can replace this and that. The thing is, what do we know beyond this? How can we explain this? In the case of these bacteria, we can explain this, and there are different models. The first one is nitrogen fixation. But this is not so reliable. Maybe, like it has the genetic to fixate nitrogen, but it has been tested even with the nitrogenous gene that the bacteria keep on changing the plant. So it's not very clear whether the biological nitrogen fixation is the best mechanism. But there are other works which are new where this is change, and they're like, yeah, bacteria will fixate nitrogen, but what do they do with it? They use it to grow, but if I do not let bacteria use it for itself, it will release it. So that ammonium is going to be used by the plant, and those mutants that are releasing ammonium have a difference here because they're offering more nitrogen to the plant. And there was a technology tested proposed by Jos van der Leyden in the 19th, and now Fabio Pedrosa retook this in Brazil. And today, this HM053 is the strain recommended by the AMPI so that many Brazilian companies can use it as an active principle for bioinput. It is a mutant that was not generated for the creation of a gene specifically.
Vamos bien con el tiempo.
You're doing well with time, I think, so I'm going to relax a little. Yeah. There will be questions afterwards, so I'm anticipating. And this paper was sent to me last night by Eduardo Blumwell. I had to include it. It's about engineering of the rhizosphere. Eduardo Blumwald is Argentinian. He works in Davis in California for many years now, a plant physiologist, and he was the first one to obtain a tomato variable resistance to stress. He worked on nitrogen fixation bacteria, and this paper was published recently. By CRISPR, they modify a wheat plant. It produces more epigenin, and it forms a biofilm on the leaves, and under those conditions, apparently, the bacteria are more efficient, creating biofilm, are more efficient to fix nitrogen. In this work, they used Azospirillum brasiliensis as a model, so I had to share this with you. But Eduardo is going to be here in December for the RELAR conference in La Plata. I hope you can attend, perhaps. And this goes hand in hand with something that is now very popular, that is recruitment. Plants call microorganisms based on their needs. It's a very new concept that it's being implemented based not only on the studies, but also product profiles, biostimulants that are intended to generate changes in rhizosphere, not in the plant. And those changes in the rhizosphere end up modifying the physiology of the plant's behavior. We also know that Azospirillum produces hormones, almost all the hormones, not the same strain. Different strains produce almost all the plant hormones. The question is why a bacteria learn to produce, from the evolutionary aspect, why they learn to produce hormones that are not useful for them. But from an evolutionary perspective, we can think that by exchanging these chemical signs, they learn to coexist with plants. They moved with the plants in the transition from water to land, and they coexist from very old times. This is a skill that is characteristic of this bacteria, and when it produces auxins, it does that in the roots. It shortens them. The auxins always reduce the length. They increase the number of lateral roots, and they increase the length of the lateral roots. That is the auxinic model. But this auxinic model, that is a dogma for Azospirillum, did not speak about this effect. This root has this number of hairs, and this one has this number of root hairs. And it's important to understand that and to be very clear about that at the level of the morphology of the root, because we love talking about the root, and the root is a very important organ for the plant. It takes the nutrients and water. It communicates with everything that is there on the soil. But if we analyze these plants of rye, the root system, you see that the absorption surface of the root is more dependent on the root hairs than of all the roots together, roots in different root formats. The root hairs are more important in the absorption. It's the equivalent to a basketball field in this 16-week rye plant. If you puncture a gut, it's responsible for the absorption of nutrients. But what are these root hairs? They are not roots. Sorry to disappoint you if you thought they were. They are cells, skin cells, and their only evolutionary difference is that they are longer. And as they are longer, they have an absorption area that is 10 to 20 times larger than the other skin cells. If we increase, and as these are cells, they are in the order of 10 to the 10th in a root. Imagine the area of absorption that they contribute to a plant and how important they are in the biostimulation process as a target for biostimulation. And precisely in the differentiation area, here we have the cell division, cell lengthening, where it happens, where the thing happens in the root here. Here, there's more water absorption, more nutrient absorption, more exudation. The three attributes that we give to the root, the most important attributes, are there in that differentiation area. What does Azospirillum do for the roots. This is metadata. A lot of papers published as to the effect of azospirillum on the roots. But among those effects, we have one in particular that is increase the density of hairs and the length, not just the density, but also the length. And by increasing, if we, in general, we put all that information, we say when we inoculate, we increase micronutrients, and water absorption through the roots. And that can be explained with the model that was known through plant stimulation, the hormones. It produces auxins, so the root grows more, and we explain that. At the lab, we started to work on this model, and what we did was to mutate the gene that allows azospirillum to produce auxins. You see the roots here. This is a control AZ39. There you see the development. It's 3 sections of the root. The development, you see there the development of each section, the number of lateral roots, but also the number and the length of the hairs. And that is the mutant one that does not produce auxins. The first conclusion was that there was something else that induced the hair synthesis. When we understood what triggered the root hair production, there's a protein in the bacteria. That is the protein that produces the flagellin that uses to swim, but it's also very reactive for the plants because the plants recognize bacteria through their flagellin. And based on this flagellar treatment, in this case in Arabidopsis, we saw there was a strong production of root hairs, but when we saw the flagellum on its own, it doesn't do that, but there are many root hairs. This is published afterwards. I mean, it's a similar model for maize. Maize is not Arabidopsis, but when we inoculate with azospirillum, in this paper they prove that there's another mechanism apart from auxins that participates in the production of root hairs. And this paper is previous. There they didn't analyze the roots, but they proved that flagellin produced a REC3 and REC, and that's what the ICR confers. It's reactive for the plant. And we can associate this to what we understand about the co-inoculation. A picture is worth 1,000 words. A soybean root, the control, inoculated with bradyrhizobium or with azospirillum. What's the difference? The number of root hairs. The root hairs, as they are cells, they look this awful because they suffer the dehydration process. In general, you cannot obtain good pictures of root hairs, but clearly the number increased. So there's more probabilities of contact. By increasing the number of root hairs, there's more probability of contact of the rhizobium with the soybean root when azospirillum is there. And this is a technology from Brazil. There, Mariangela, Hungria, and Embrapa, in general, they recommend this technology because they made the estimates. When they co-inoculate, they almost double the yield. So of course, they're going to recommend co-inoculation, but it's not co-inoculating with whatever you want, bacillum or zygomon. It's not co-inoculation per se. It's a model that is understood. And here, this is just for, in red, there you see the effect on the soil. And we said, well, is there any effect on the soil of this bacteria? And we have to understand the soil and the rhizosphere as something equivalent to the microbiome in the guts. I mean, we have the roots, they have the microbiome, the rhizosphere, that is all the organisms that live with the plants and they communicate with, and they maintain an active population and they exchange a lot of information with the microbiome. And why? If we don't have probiotics that can be used to modify the behavior of the microbiome, why we think that we can't have one at the lab? This is AI, it's not sold, it's not a product, but why not? So we analyzed the effect of introducing azospirillum in the rhizosphere of the corn, of the maize, and see what happens with the microbiome. And to make this complex thing more simple, we managed to determine that this bacteria recruits others Pseudomonas, rhizobia. I mean, it's recruiting other bacteria that are good for the plant. And that is one aspect that was mentioned when she talked about this yesterday. But we have to understand the effect of biostimulants, not only for the plant, but also for the microbiome, because there can be a beneficial and a non-beneficial effect. It's important to understand it. So, to summarize, the biological fixation of nitrogen might be a mechanism. Why not? This nutritional contribution could be phytostimulation because the auxins play a role. They increase the number of lateral roots, etc. I mean, the hairs are more, but the root is modified. There's rhizostimulation, and this depends on the flagellin. And we can also speak of an effect on the soil as probiotic and also at the air level, and this has been proven, at the level of systemic resistance. So it is important to have this information and to understand how a product works, because for a seller, this is a sarsaparillum. Perhaps many are not interested in this, but if you give this information to a salesman or to a technician and they can translate it differently to explain properties and functionalities, when you just stick with it just improves yield, or just the nutrient uptake improved, or the fertilization ratio decreased, well, now the farmer they are our colleagues, they are technicians, they want more. They will say, but how does it work? And how is this product different from another? At what level? I'm not saying that the new technology is bad, but it has to be clear and based on more than 5,000 papers that have been published about this bacteria. That is consolidating a technology. Let's do the same with all the new technologies from science, from academia, and from businesses, so that the rules of the game are clearer as well. And here, I have 7 minutes, okay? Here, you see, it meets the attributes we had considered for microbial bioinputs or biostimulants, any of these benefits. And this is an attribute that I don't know if so much attention is being paid to. That is environmental impact and the effect it has on the environmental impact for crops or agriculture. And now let's move on to soybeans. We've spoken a lot about greenhouse gases, non-oil seeds, grasses, maize, wheat. They are emitters. But the bad news is, perhaps you didn't see it when I presented the table, the first slide, but here, when we break down nitrous oxide, the oilseeds crop is an emitter as well. It emits nitrous oxide, and this was proven by the nitrous oxide network in Argentina some years ago. It's not only emitting, but it can emit more than wheat. How do we manage that? We just use the bacteria so that they take nutrients from the plant. But here we started thinking at the lab, and for a big problem, we are thinking of a small solution. And so at the lab at the Rio Cuarto University, we've been working on a spin-off. It's a startup called Soy Green, whose purpose is precisely to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions in agriculture. We are all there. You can see us there. Many of them have worked in several companies. A lot of consolidated work, but I wanted to share these figures. 3 areas, 4 experimental sites. The thesis was 60% reduction in the emission of nitrous oxide, 75% of reduction in non-inoculated, 86% in inoculated with a commercial inoculant by using this technology, and an increase in yield of up to 8%. First year, these are tests in the field. And this is the QR code. This is a survey that we are doing by the School of Economics of the University of Rio Cuarto, also on technology adoption. It's important for us to know whether these technologies are friendly or not for farmers. So I ask you to take a picture of the code, and the wings represent the search for angel partners or angel investors. So we are open to receiving the assistance of angel investors. And this is, I always publish a lot of things on LinkedIn. If you want to follow me, there's always news about these activities. And that was the final slide. This is the QR code on the Aapresid survey. I think it's important. So 3 QR codes. These are the 3 of them. And then as we wait for the questions, this is one, this is the second, and this is the third. This is the least important one, this one. And this is the most important one. Those that take a picture will win. No, it's a joke. But this will be very helpful. And we have 3 minutes left before we are dismissed. So use this time for asking questions. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. First, thank you. Thank you, Martín and Fabricio. That was so nice to hear you. The first question is for whoever takes the mic first. Speaking of biostimulants, what about their combination with micro and macronutrients? There are commercial products already in the market. I'm not going to mention the companies, but you have products based on the application of micro and macronutrients together with microorganisms. There's a limitation there with the technology. They are mostly based on things that form resistant structures like spores, fungi, or bacteria. Not every bacteria survives, but the technology is there, and of course it is functional. That's my opinion. And what about plant hormones with micronutrients? I'm thinking of a company that sells a lot of plant phytohormones. As long as there's a symphony, the hormones are pleiotropic. The hormones have lots of defects, and it depends on where you use them. That will determine their effect. If the technology targets root development, for instance, and that favors the uptake of nutrients, it works. If you think of a leaf treatment, I imagine cytoxins with hydrogen measure, it could work. Perhaps there are products already in the market. Yeah, it has to be proven, evaluated. It depends on what company provides them, because the phytohormones, I mean, you have to be very precise with the concentration, but there are products. Any other questions? With algae extracts, I have a lot of phytohormones. That is another possibility. We just have 1 minute left. Preventive applications, something was mentioned. Yeah, preventive application from the REC, of course, is convenient. At $3 the dose per hectare, if you have a microorganism that ensure better nutrition but can prevent the possible attack of a pathogen, why not? Now, the biggest effect has to be very clear. In the case of REC, on leaf application, there's a very significant effect there, because when you apply it, if the bacteria does not colonize correctly, the effect tends to be very short-lasting. You have to make sure the bacteria survives in the soil and is associated to the plant in order to have effects. Otherwise, the bacteria is lost in the soil. We have 30 seconds. It's a lot of time. Moments of application. What about moments of application of the biostimulant? Everything that has to do with the yield. Well, when it depends on decision making, everything that has to do with prevention before the pathogen appears, depending on the pathogen will appear in the root or in the air part. Very short answer. You can't complain.